Chapter 141. Welcome Home Party. The carriage stopped in front of the palace, and the doorman helped them down. There was clearly a party in progress, with a band playing and dozens or hundreds of nobles in the palace gardens. Trumpets started to play, and the crowd clapped as the staff escorted the returning royals into the garden. Everyone, we welcome the victorious return of the second prince and the ninth princess. The king called, loud enough to be heard from across the garden. The garden erupted in applause, and the royals bowed politely from the top of the steps. Nobody said anything about Dominic's presence as he followed them toward the main crowd, but as soon as he was off the stairs, he found himself swarmed with lower-ranking nobles. "Advisor, congratulations on your victory. I heard that the techno-wizards under your command came up with a new orb design. Any word on when that will be available to the nobility?" A baron whose name Dominic did not know asked. "Unfortunately, I haven't been given any clues on that front. Should the armistice fall through, it is possible that they will be spread to the Royal Airship Corps quickly, but whether they will make their way to every city is beyond my pay grade." Dominic replied. The barons around him smiled and nodded in understanding. They had just been fishing for information and hadn't expected that anyone would have made a solid decision yet. An older man with his hair pulled into a tight ponytail shook Dominic's hand as he approached. "I don't suppose that you have one of those mana revolvers for sale, do you? I saw the ones that the ninth Princess Royal Guards are wearing, and they're magnificent. It's not easy to come across rare-grade pistols." The man turned his lapel to show a brooch on his shirt holding a gunslinger's trade skill core, identifiable by the pistol marking on the Magitech orb. "I can certainly come up with at least one rare pistol to sell to a qualified user. Should we step aside and work out a deal?" Dominic asked. The other barons frowned. That would be the end of their easy chance to get to know the new advisor. "Perhaps later. I will ask for you tomorrow if you're available. My duties keep me at the palace now, so it's not an urgent request." The gunslinger relented, keenly aware of the displeasure of his peers. One after another, every unranked noble, minor baron or baronet, or palace staffer with an affinity for magical engineering or firearms came to visit Dominic. While the royals were surrounded by many more nobles, the ones who came to Dominic were all ones who shared similar interests. And there were a lot of nobles who shared his interest in firearms. 2 hours into intense discussions of what would make for an even better military standard-issue weaponry, Dominic caught Princess Alexis' eye and saw her laughing at him. She had managed to hide behind her brothers, who were taking the brunt of the public's interest in their recent activities, and had managed to obtain her own server with a whole tray of snacks. The beverage trays made their way through the crowd every few minutes, but Dominic knew that he was going to be too busy to be excusing himself to the privy, so he was going light on the beverages. Eventually, the crowd around him did fade, as all the lesser nobles had social obligations to either visit with allies or the higher nobles who oversaw their region, and Dominic managed to sneak away to one of the tables full of snacks for a moment. He had managed to load a small plate, carefully balanced on his left hand when Dominic found himself cornered again. "Crown Prince Claudius, I have heard great things about your gallantry." Dominic greeted the powerfully built noble. "As have I about yours. But I heard a few other things as well. Walk with me a moment," the Crown Prince replied, not waiting for Dominic's answer. The Crown Prince led the way up the stairs and into the royal wing of the palace, where his quarters were. He motioned for Dominic to take a seat in the common area of his suite, what Dominic would have called a living room in a setup less grand than this one. "First off, wonderful job with the Magitech orbs and the airship defense of Burton. I had thought that we would have to negotiate to get my sister back after the war, so that is a most pleasant surprise. However, it does bring us to the most pressing matter of the evening. What exactly are your intentions toward the ninth princess?" Claudius demanded. He was in full protective older brother mode, and Dominic wasn't sure how to answer that question, much less answer it safely. "I am not sure that I follow the line of questioning, Your Highness." The Crown Prince rolled his eyes. "Now isn't the time for political niceties. I know that mere days into the siege of Burton, both yourself and the princess moved into the suite next to the strategy room and remained there for the remainder of your time in the city. I know from my loud-mouthed younger brother that she has grown accustomed to reading and napping with her head in your lap. So, I will ask again, What are your intentions for my little sister, and am I going to have to arrange an emergency wedding? Dominic froze. When you put it like that, it really didn't sound like an advisory role that he was taking, did it? I can assure you that nothing happened which might necessitate an emergency wedding. Though I will admit that the line between close friend and advisor may have become blurry. Dominic offered, hoping that might calm the crown prince's growing rage a little. Claudius nodded. Well, that is a relief. But in a way, it is also problematic. Dominic frowned. Because I am her advisor? The crown prince shook his head.
No.
Because our royal father intends to ask for the lands formerly of Southern Wavemates as reparations for the war damages. You are one of the few known surviving Wavemates nobles. If you were, just by chance, to have gotten yourself involved in a scandalous situation with my most beloved sister, it would have given him the perfect excuse to claim that the lands were rightfully property of the Signia crown. How much of the land was His Majesty intending on asking for? Claudius smiled at Dominic. The entire Stantia province, half of the total land of the fallen nation, including 3 major cities. Those cities have all fallen to our troops, by the way. I don't know if you ever got updates, as it was impossible to get messengers to Burton for most of the battle. Dominic frowned. Limsbury and Coster fell to Signia forces? Nearly the moment that we arrived. The locals turned on their Dago's lords, and our militia increased by tens of thousands in an hour, with all of the new recruits already inside the city walls. The gates of Limsbury and Coster were never even closed, and Wistfield assassinated the Earl in residence and presented his head as a gift for our troops when they arrived. Dominic nodded in understanding. Like the manor he grew up in, Wistfield was not a walled city, but rather a sprawling metropolis that had emerged from a trading stop at the junction of 2 major roads. There was no way to defend it. If he had died, the only other options would be to battle in the open fields or flee. Chapter 142. Protective Brother. Dominic used the food as an excuse to give himself a moment to think. So, what you're saying is that it would be best if a marriage alliance united myself and the 9th princess, but you would most desperately like to tear my arms from their sockets for harboring such thoughts about your little sister? He asked. The crown prince chuckled softly. I like it when a man understands the position that he is in. You know, most of the lesser nobles would have immediately agreed and suggested the marriage themselves, then taken their well-earned beating as the price of victory. However, I am disinclined to dismember you for all those nights spent alone in the strategy room, so long as there is no child involved. So, he still didn't believe that Dominic was telling the truth about their relationship, but no beating sounded like a good start. After all, the crown prince might not be as powerful as the second prince when it came to magic, but he was an accomplished general and well known for both his physical strength and his magical acumen. A palace made place tea in front of Dominic, who politely took a sip and then paused as he tasted dragonberries. Oh, that brings me back. Now, is that tea just for me, or are things going to get interesting here as well? Dominic demanded, flaring with magical power as he prepared to keep the maid from fleeing. Calm down, advisor. It is simply a test prepared for you, to ensure that the rumors of your royal lineage were fact and not carefully crafted fiction. Claudius demanded before Dominic could do anything to harm his staff. Dominic sighed and took another sip of the tea. I do love the taste of dragonberries. Yes, I have enough Wavemates dragonkin lineage that the berries won't harm me, even if I eat them as a side dish. But I suppose that you knew that already. What now? Claudius gave him a smile that promised great pain. Now, my father has insisted that you'll be part of the marriage alliance search for my dear sister Alexis. The trials will be announced tonight and begin either tomorrow or the day after, depending on how violently the princess reacts. Who are the other candidates? If you can tell me, that is. So far as I know, the options are the 3rd son of Duke North of West Kyria, Marquis Bridgegover of Midfield, the younger sons of 6 Signia nobles, and yourself. There were 3 Dagos nobles who had written formal petitions for an alliance, but they all perished in the war. The Crown Prince explained. Dominic nodded. Does a marriage alliance between Dagos and Signia currently exist? The Crown Prince laughed. Oh, indeed there is one. though it may be some time before my naughty wife is suitably contrite for her role in withholding information about her father's plans from me. He sounded like he was not nearly as upset about his wife's duplicity as Dominic expected. But by land area, Dagos was their largest neighbor, so it wasn't shocking that the first prince was married to a Dagos princess. Dominic was about to speak when the door to the garden slammed open and Princess Alexis stormed into the room. "Claudius, did you know? Our father intends to force me to marry. Plus, look at the list. Marquis Bridgegover is nearly 50. The third son of Duke North has already had 2 wives disappear under mysterious circumstances, and the Earl of Lightson is an asshole." She flopped down on the sofa beside Dominic and instinctively opened her mouth to be fed when Dominic picked up a small tart. The Crown Prince's expression told Dominic that he didn't believe a single wholesome moment between the two had ever occurred. But the pastry did silence the princess long enough for her brother to speak. "Earl Lightson is dead. Unless they're going to replace his proposal with his heir, who is currently 12, I believe that you're safe on that front. Also, there is a new Marquis Bridgegover, son of the man you are thinking of." Princess Alexis got back to her feet and paced around the room, grumbling about marriage alliances, while the Crown Prince's annoyance with Dominic slowly morphed to amusement. "You do know why those particular names were chosen, do you not?" Claudius asked. "Of course I do. They all have connections to nobles from Wavemates. Signia will be demanding half of the territory as reparations, and we need a bloodline connection for the locals to recognize our claim as legitimate. And where else might we find a qualified former Wavemates noble that would give the crown a proper claim to the territory?" The Crown Prince replied. Dominic was being railroaded, he realized. Not that he had any objections to the princess, quite the opposite, actually. But she had proven to be an excellent friend, and this could make things incredibly awkward. Princess Alexis turned and pointed at Dominic. "If that's the case, we've got another option, don't we? I mean, you know what, let's talk about this later." Then she turned and walked back out of the room, while Crown Prince Claudius tried not to laugh. "And still, you deny that anything happened?" he asked Dominic once Alexis was out of sight. Dominic sighed. "I said nothing that could lead to pregnancy. Don't underestimate the strong bonds that 2 admirers of fictional literature left unattended can form." The Crown Prince recoiled in mock horror. "Oh, you're one of them. No wonder my second brother spoke so highly of you. But it might be for the best. Consider it and don't rule anything out. You are her advisor, after all. If you give the role of husband to another, you'll have to deal with them for the next half a century or longer." Crown Prince Claudius looked like he was done with the topic, so Dominic finished the dragonberry tea and then wiped the cup out with a napkin so that nobody got accidentally poisoned. He got to his feet. "Thank you for your consideration, Your Highness. I will come to a decision by morning." The Crown Prince nodded, then motioned for one of his assistants to come forward with a message, clearly dismissing Dominic. Now, all he had to do was wrap his head around the idea that he really might be about to get himself completely embroiled in royal politics in the most irrevocable way. Chapter 143. No Backing Out. Dominic returned to his room in the apprentice portion of Pop's suite and found the old dwarf sitting with his feet up in the main room, drinking whiskey from the bottle. "Rough day?" he asked, but Pops didn't even look up. The old dwarf sighed as he drank. "It's been an entire rough month. But I probably should have expected it. Dagos put up a great front when they pretended to be allies, and their agents infiltrated everything within the palace, and some spots within the city as well, all through apparently legitimate hiring processes. We've been weeding them out since you left, and let me tell you, there was some real chaos when they realized that the princess was gone. Your trick of sneaking her out as your girlfriend worked amazingly well. It took them 2 weeks to realize that they weren't missing a staff member and that nobody had quit to go on the run with you. Now, the battles have calmed down, and we have to put up with idiot nobles demanding everything under the sun as rewards for their contributions, and all the ridiculous requests that they can think of as so-called security upgrades to their estates. Naturally, they want them all expedited by the crown, in case Dagos doesn't agree to the armistice." Dominic nodded. "So, there is a lot of work to do, and I'm assuming not nearly enough people to do it." "Exactly. But that's not your problem today. There will be visitors for you later, I assume. Every time there are awards for military merit, the vultures come crawling from the woodwork, looking for a leg to hug. They will want you to pick something that benefits them and might possibly benefit you later. Normally, I tell them to piss off, but you've got a better reputation, so you can pretend to consider their ideas. Just be sure not to give them an answer that they can take as a positive agreement, or they'll try to hold you to it forever. Pops elaborated. But the first visitor that came to the door was not an opportunistic noble looking to get ahead. Instead, it was a member of the royal guard. Sorcerer Dominic. I heard that you might have mana revolvers for sale. He greeted them from the door. I do. They're mana usage only, but I have a number of them. Uncommon quality, level 10. Dominic agreed. Made with clay to steel? Pops asked. Dominic nodded. Not the most durable weapons in the world, but as far as mana revolvers go, they're not too bad. Dominic set a pair of them on the table, and the guard smiled. I know about the clay to steel spell. It's not perfect, but it's functional enough. I would have never thought someone would use it to make Magitech pistols, though. That's just crazy talk. Honestly, I would be surprised that it worked at all, but you're a sorcerer. Do you offer a Royal Guard discount? Dominic chuckled. Normally, the Royal Guard could just requisition it, and then you would wait and hope to be repaid at some later point. I can give you a 2 for 1 discount. Dominic offered. The guard chuckled and passed over a cloth bag of mana cores. Dominic put it in his storage and handed over the pistols, which the guard holstered on his hips. Ah, that is good. They're made to the standard production size for gunslinger revolvers. I was worried I would need to get new holsters made. Pleasure doing business with you. I'm off to the range to test the new pistols. Dominic stepped into the hall to watch the happy guard leaving, and saw that there were Royal Guard members stationed at either end of the hallway and at the door to the central garden area that his bedroom window faced. That was far more security than usual, and Royal Guards, not palace guards as well. That was definitely a change in policy. But it would explain why so few people were coming through this portion of the palace, even if they were no longer interested in the garden party. So Dominic settled into the chair across from Pops. How about a change of topic? Heard any good gossip lately? Dominic joked. Oh, the gossip mill has been super juicy lately. Did you know that I can hear everything that happens in the kitchen if I'm not working the forge in my room? Pops replied. Dominic nodded. I can hear them from mine as well, but you're much closer. Well, they found out that the 5th prince, who was killed in the ambushes during the ogre invasion, had more children than the palace was aware of. They are all fighting over the inheritance that he left, and it's turned into quite the show. They all returned here a little over a week ago to petition for the king to include them in the official dispersion of assets. Oh, and I got to flog George, that was fun. Dominic held up his hand to stop the old dwarf. Back up. You flogged George? The journeyman? How did that even happen? Pops down the last of his whiskey, then poured himself an ale. You know how he bet big on your first weapon, right? Well, then he lost a second bet on your spears, trying to recover his losses. Then he lost 3 more in the next week, to the point that he was 6 months behind on his debts and couldn't keep up with the payments he owed. The journeyman called a tribunal to declare him insolvent, at which point all his earnings would be split between his financiers, other than a weekly stipend. Part of the punishment for becoming insolvent due to gambling is corrective punishment. 10 strokes with the flog every week until the debts are paid. Pop's tone was casual, but Dominic could tell that he actually enjoyed putting his obnoxious former apprentice in his place. He wouldn't be surprised if the whole forge had come out to watch, as George was generally despised by everyone that he met. Not just because he constantly made bad bets, but because he was generally insufferable, even when he was winning. Chapter 144. Trouble in the Forge. Dominic went to the coffee pot and made sure that it was full before pouring himself a cup. You know, this whole conflict has been a mess. Everywhere Insignia has been infiltrated with Dago's spies and loyalists, to the point that I wouldn't be surprised if half the ones turning in the traitors were actually also working for a Dago's noble on the side. How much money have they dumped into Signia to make this possible? He asked. Pops chuckled. Probably more than they could afford, now that it looks like they're on the losing side of the war. War debts are known to cripple a losing nation for a generation. Now, what Signia is asking for isn't large compared to most such situations. The region they want has 3 major cities, but it's an unstable region that takes a significant military force to keep under control. Being able to retreat from the province will probably be the difference between Dagos collapsing during the succession struggle and thriving within a decade. Then why would Signia do it? Just for a clean ending to the conflict? Dominic asked. Pops shrugged. I suspect that there is more to it, but that's above my pay grade. Perhaps not yours, though. You're a royal advisor now, so if they make it common knowledge among the royal family, it will make it to you first. For now, it is a decision by the king, and he isn't willing to accept any questions on the demand. A brisk knock at the door was followed by the sound of someone entering, and Pop's expression turned from annoyed to nearly murderous. Master Smith, we need you in the forge. There has been an incident. The young forge worker pleaded. Dominic got to his feet. I will go with you. If there are issues in the forge so serious that the journeyman on duty can't take care of it, that is probably something that I should know firsthand. Dominic followed Pops and the worker out of the suite, and noticed that a pair of the royal guards followed them down the hallway. Whatever their orders were, they included not leaving Dominic unattended. Or perhaps Pops. Pops burst through the front doors of the forge, ignoring the wave of heat that slammed them in the face, and the fact that there was broken stone and scattered tools everywhere. 2 figures were grappling on the floor in the middle of the room, which showed clear signs of combat, as something had broken not only portions of the forge, but also chunks out of the wall. The old dwarf didn't hesitate, as he pushed past the ring of workers at the edge of the room, and then forcefully pulled the 2 men apart. What the fuck do you think that you're doing? He shouted, his voice echoing off the stone. That son of a bitch stole from me. Again. The man on Pop's right shouted back. I didn't steal a damn thing, and you know it. If you could turn out a rare blade of any type, you would still be a junior journeyman working as an apprentice. The other man retorted. Both were heavily injured, and Dominic noticed blood on a pair of swords, plus a dagger laying on the ground. Dominic turned to the royal guards who had followed them in, and they simply shrugged. This was Pop's forge, and they wouldn't take any action without solid proof, or a request from the master. Someone get a healer before these 2 idiots bleed out in my forge. Now, explain to me why you think that he stole from you. Pops demanded. This is the 2nd time in 2 weeks that I've come back to my station from a break, only to find my work missing. And just like last time, an hour later, he turns in a rare grade item identical to the one I was finishing. The accuser insisted, his speech slurred by a swollen face and missing teeth. He was also bleeding heavily from his side, but that didn't seem to concern him nearly as much as the missing item. The workers would get profit from rare items that they produced, so there was a huge financial incentive to make rare-grade items. But finishing someone else's work was a tricky process if you hadn't watched them to see exactly what stage they were at. You also needed to know what they were making, but that was a smaller concern here, as most of the journeymen and apprentices in the forge would know the same recipes. Pops sighed. Do we have the weapon in question? One of the other journeymen nodded. It's still in the armory. Once the fight started, we locked everything down and sent for you. Pops nodded and stomped over to the armory cage where all the journeyman-made items were kept. Dominic, keep an eye on them. If they keep fighting, just blast them and put them out of my misery. The old dwarf insisted. A few of the apprentices chuckled at what they thought was a misspoken phrase. But Dominic knew what he meant. Pops was sick of dealing with their nonsense, and he didn't care if it ended with them fired or dead. Pops came back seconds later with a rare-grade weapon in his hands. It was beautifully crafted, an energy blade in the same design as Dominic had made for his first demonstration right here in this forge. But one thing that Dominic noticed was that it didn't have a visible maker's mark. It was complete and presumably functional, as they would have tested it when it was turned in for credit. So, it made no sense that the identification of the crafter wasn't carved into the weapon anywhere that Dominic could see. That definitely wasn't normal, and it didn't bode well for the chances of solving this without more drama. Pops held up the sword so he could inspect it, then dropped a burlap sack over the sword. Now, as you both claim that you forged this sword, tell me something about it that the other wouldn't know. Write it on a paper sheet, and then I will ask each of you a set of questions. You tell me if they're true or false. Pops instructed. Well, that was not what Dominic was expecting. Chapter 145. Mystery Blade. The two men both focused intently on writing out their notes, then hid them from each other with hateful glares as they passed them to Dominic to give to Pops. The palace guard medics came in to use their healing spells and then patch up the two wounded craftsmen while Pops examined the letters that both had given him. Dominic could tell that the master smith already had a pretty good idea who had actually made the weapon, but he was keeping to his word, so nobody thought he was playing favorites. Then, he nodded to himself and began the questioning. As you believe that this weapon was stolen from you, I will start on your side. The hilt socket on the sword has an imperfection from a misplaced chisel. True or false?
True.
A wedge chisel. Pops turned to the other man. The fuller is off-center by 1 millimeter. True or false?
True.
In opposite directions on either side, but only at the base. They match perfectly at the tip. The Magitech circuitry for the energy barrier has 3 repair marks in it. He asked the first smith. False. They were perfect when I installed them. The knotwork carved into the wood of the handle has an imperfection in the pattern. False. It's deliberate, and it's on all 4 edges. Pops nodded, and then took the bag off the blade. Now, for the last question. Where is the maker's mark? Pops asked, directing it at both of them. I didn't have one on it, because the work wasn't finished yet when it was stolen. The maker's mark is actually inside the hilt. If you take the wood off the grip, you will see it. Pops took out a punch and knocked the pins free of the handle, then turned the handle of the sword toward the pair. The man who had been accused of stealing looked smug as the other smith realized that this was not the sword he had made. It looked like his missing blade, but in tiny letters, carved in the gap between the Magitech circuitry and the gem socket, where it couldn't have been placed after the blade was assembled, was a short phrase. James Jacob Myers 8/12/439 over the counter at Fizzle's Tavern. One man was smirking, while the accuser looked completely perplexed. He mouthed the words once, then a second time. Have you figured it out yet? It's the date your oldest son was conceived. Shame you couldn't be there for it. The man who believed this was his stolen blade launched himself at the other smith, dagger in his hand. But his opponent wasn't dumb enough to taunt someone like that without expecting violent retaliation. He stepped forward to grab his hand, stopping the strike until the palace guards could pull them apart again. Take their storage devices. Pops ordered. Both men turned over their storage items, which Pops looked through, then handed back. The missing blade is not in either item. I want the entire forge searched. Find the missing blade. If anyone knows where it went, you had better tell me now. Pops ordered. The apprentices scattered, searching the forge for the missing weapon, while Pops looked at the other journeymen who would have been working in the same area as these two. While we may have sorted the origin of the blade that Journeyman Jacobs turned in, we are still missing one nearly complete weapon that is virtually identical to this one. I want to know where it went, and everything that happened in the forge in the hours leading up to this incident. Pops demanded, then he smiled. Fortunately for us all, we have a council present if we need to make this a criminal matter. 2 masters of the forge, a royal advisor, and 2 royal guards. We will get to the bottom of this nonsense before my coffee gets cold, and I'm not afraid to clean house and start over with a fresh batch of apprentices. Pops insisted. There was a long moment of silence, punctuated by the apprentices searching the most improbable spots, looking for the missing blade. Finally, one of the journeymen spoke up. It's on top of the forge vent. Those two have been messing with each other for years. I admit, today they took it way too far, but it's far from the first time that they've played pranks on each other. A pair of apprentices brought over a ladder and pulled down a mostly complete sword from the top of the vent cover. To Dominic, it looked just like the other one, but just a few steps from completed. The level of mimicry shown by the first blade was astonishing. Pops sighed as he looked at the weapon, then at the 2 wounded journeymen, who were being restrained by the palace guards. Dominic couldn't blame James for that particular necessity. Jacob had just publicly announced that he had been having an affair with the man's wife and had fathered the man's oldest son. That was absolutely brutal. And he should probably sleep with one eye open and an extra lock on the door. What am I going to do with you two? Obviously, you can't be trusted to behave. So, for the next month, your pay will be docked to cover the damages caused by your fight, and you will both be on probation. Journeyman James, you will remain on the late morning shift start time. Journeyman Jacob, you will be moved to the graveyard shift, 11 to 7. If there are any more complaints about either of you, you are gone. And I mean gone, without a royal referral for your time here. Pops informed them. That looked like it was enough to get them to behave. At least for a little while. But first, you have both earned a written reprimand and an evening in the brig to cool your heads before you go back to your duties. Then Pops turned to the crowd. I expect better out of all of you. This incident should never have been allowed to get so out of hand. You are journeymen, not apprentices. You are expected to be able to keep your workplace operating smoothly without a master looking over your shoulder. Chapter 146, Challenged. Dominic made a note for the princess that the Forges were having personal drama, but it didn't appear to be anything that was deliberately sabotaging their progress. Just a personal grudge. He was just stepping out of the forge when someone shouted his name. His full name. Advisor Dominic Wavemates. Stand and deliver. I demand satisfaction today. The nobleman insisted. You're not really my type. I'm sure I can find you a lover if you want, though. Lord? Sorry, I have no idea who you are. Dominic replied. The two royal guards laughed behind their hands, and one of them whispered an explanation to Dominic. He's demanding a duel. I think he wants you to drop out of contention for Princess Alexis. Dominic nodded slightly as the enraged nobleman stormed toward him. Not only had the advisor insulted his demand, then questioned his sexuality, he even had the gall to insult his lineage as not noteworthy. The nobleman tossed his glove in Dominic's face with a hateful grin, and Dominic raised a hand to stop the royal guard assigned to him from stepping forward. We can settle this now if you would like. Or tomorrow at noon, your choice. Dominic agreed, then picked up the glove and threw it back in its owner's face. I, Jonathan, third son of Baron Don Farley, will settle this today. Magitech duel, pistols at 10 paces. All of the forge workers were pouring out into the courtyard now, their previous issues forgotten. Dominic frowned as he saw the pistol at the man's hip. An uncommon Magitech pistol, level 5. But more importantly, it was in a quick-draw holster. Well, there was nothing to be done about it right now. Dominic took out a rare-grade mana revolver he had made at level 20, as he was intending to sell it later, and tucked it into his belt. The royal guard cleared his throat. The contestants will start back-to-back, take 10 paces, then turn to face each other. They may draw and fire when I ring the bell, he announced. More royal guards came running out of the palace, along with Princess Alexis and Crown Prince Claudius. Well, we've got a right proper audience today. You will have your resolution. Dominic noted. Idiot should have demanded a magical duel. Pops grumbled. A magical duel prohibited the use of projectile weapons and other non-magical attacks. It wouldn't even be a fight, and more than likely, the challenger would have dropped out and left the marriage trials in shame. But Dominic didn't know that. He also didn't know that the trials had started, or that anyone was likely to challenge him to a duel instead of trying for supremacy in the king's trials. A royal guard stepped forward and handed Dominic a handkerchief. From my mistress, to bring you luck.
Colonel Wilkes explained.
Dominic nodded solemnly and tied the gift around his right wrist. That was how the tradition went in the romance books that Alexis loved to read, though it was outdated, and normally the present was put in a pocket for safekeeping these days. Dominic walked up to Lord Jonathan and nodded, then turned, so they could stand back to back. His opponent was visibly shaking with nerves, but as the royal guard called the paces, his steps were steady. 8, 9, 10. Turn and face your opponent, he declared. Dominic stared into the eyes of this audacious young lord. There was fear, but also confidence. Most likely, he was a trained gunfighter, Dominic assumed. But his hands were still shaking. Ding! Dominic didn't hesitate when the first notes of the bell reached his ear and simply tilted the pistol back in its pouch, not bothering to draw it completely. The click of the trigger and a surge of mana let Dominic know his timing was correct, and his opponent's eyes went wide. Ping! Dominic felt his left shoulder pushed back just as he fired, and then watched as the pistol flew free of his opponent's hand. Lord Jonathan held his hand and howled in pain as he collapsed to his knees. Dominic had been the second to fire, and his shot was off target. The bullet had hit the handle of his opponent's pistol, going through the fingers and out through the palm. The mana bullet was not intended to be used on humans. Not at level 20. It had taken half his hand off, and the bleeding was intense. Do you yield, or will you continue? The Royal Guard referee demanded. I will continue, Dominic insisted. They waited a moment for the young nobleman to recover his wits, but before he could speak, he passed out from blood loss. Healers, tend to the young lord. Advisor Dominic has won the duel, and Lord Jonathan will withdraw from contention for the position of royal consort. The referee announced. Princess Alexis ran over to Dominic and pulled his robes open, then patted at his chest in confusion. Where did it hit? She asked. Left shoulder. I'm fine, see? Mage armor is still active. It didn't puncture. Dominic replied. Alexis stepped back and Dominic felt his head snap to the side as the slap hit his cheek. Don't you ever scare me like that again. If you had armor on, you should have told me. Dominic heard many gasps and a few guards snickering quietly at her demand. Yes, Your Highness. I was remiss in my duties. Dominic agreed enthusiastically. Alexis blushed as she realized she had made a spectacle of herself, and then deeper as she slowly wrapped her mind around the fact that her first instinct was to keep him from getting hurt, even though this was a duel for the right to pursue her in marriage. She had never had any intention of being anyone's blushing bride, but the simple and earnest way that Dominic smiled at her did something to her resolve. Like, maybe if it were to him, it might not be so bad to be a married woman. Chapter 147. Claim defended. Princess Alexis turned and elegantly returned to the palace, leaving the rest of the crowd to gossip about the strange interaction that they had just witnessed. Unfortunately, that also included her oldest brother, the Crown Prince. Lord Sorcerer. It is good to see that you would so vocally defend your intention to court my sister, and the Crown thanks you for your leniency in not aiming for a fatal strike. Claudius began, his ice-blue eyes sparkling with amusement that didn't reach his voice. Your Highness, I can't say that I had expected to be in this situation today. I had simply come to accompany my master while he settled a dispute in the forge. Dominic replied. Pops nodded at the prince, who gave him a polite nod. Congratulations on your first victory in the trials. My staff will contact you tonight to arrange a chaperone meeting between you and your potential bride. Then, the Crown Prince departed, leaving Dominic even more confused than he had been when he was challenged. Since when did he need a chaperone to meet with the princess? He was her advisor. The unfortunate Lord Jonathan was escorted away by medical staff who had stopped the bleeding with healing magic, but weren't sure whether there was going to be a way to salvage his hand. The bullet had done too much damage to it, and healing magic wasn't a miracle. It was considered that by some, as it could heal wounds with minimal scarring and cure many diseases. But regrowing limbs was a very difficult task, and the hand was a complex part of the body. Far more difficult to repair than a missing chunk of muscle tissue or a broken bone. Dominic's lack of scarring was an oddity among nobles who had trained with the blade. Even training swords would leave injuries, and broken skin from hits through chain armor was incredibly common. So, it was just expected that every nobleman would have a collection of scars, both large and small, across his arms, and a half-dozen other spots on his body. Even the princess, trained as a paladin, had a multitude of faint scars on her arms from magically healed wounds. Well, it looks like you've taken an early lead in the betting on the identity of the next royal consort. Once I get these louts back to work, I will join you in the suite for a drink. I expect that you'll be busy during dinner, so you should mentally prepare yourself first and find an outfit that might impress a lady, assuming that you do own something of that sort. Pops joked. He knew full well that Dominic was likely to either wear sorcerer robes to dinner or do his best with the uniform outfits that he was given when he started working as a royal advisor. Dominic gave the other forge workers a sympathetic smile, then headed back into the palace with a pair of royal guards behind him. So they were assigned to watch him and not Pops. Once they were inside and away from the attention of the nobles and the staff, one of the guards stepped up beside Dominic to whisper to him. You should stop in at the supply room and get a holster for that pistol. You're not always going to be able to shrug off firing second. Plus, you need to look good for dinner. Do you have an idea of what you will wear? Dominic paused. He hadn't thought about that. He had been wearing robes with armor for ages. Thank you. We should stop at the tailor as well and see if they have something in stock. I have just the right outfit in mind.
And he did.
It wasn't his own original fashion idea, but the male lead of the romance novel that Alexis was reading wore black leather pants with a black silk shirt, unbuttoned halfway down the front. Dominic didn't think that he could get away with that at a formal dinner. He could do the rest of the outfit correctly. Maybe not the shirt, though. Black shirts and blonde hair weren't a great combination. It just made his head look extra bright. Perhaps if he got a fancy one with some golden decoration to pull the light colors down? The experts would know. The tailor was closer, so that was where Dominic headed first. The master was on duty when he arrived, and the old man had a huge smile for Dominic. I suspected that you would be here soon. Now, let's get you all ready for your big date. What style are you going with? Naval with brass accessories? Perhaps something regal? Lace and ruffles for that elegant sense of timeless wealth. Dominic smiled. Are you familiar with the sort of outfits that the rakish noblemen of ladies' romance books wear? The old man laughed. Oh, I know exactly what you're thinking. Now, let's see what we actually have for it. It's not the sort of thing that is requested from the palace tailors often, but I should have something. He went into a back room and Dominic could hear him humming happily as he searched for the right look. Here, I have a few options. Start with the dark brown leather pants. They're a more modern style, with side pouches for Magitech storage. Wear that with a pistol belt. Just leave the munitions loops empty, as it's prohibited to display explosives or weapons in the royal dining room. Now, I've got a royal blue silk shirt that matches your eyes pretty well, but it is also exactly the color of hers. Try those on, and we will see if it's too informal for a royal dinner. Dominic stepped behind the dressing curtain and came back out a minute later. The belt is too much, but keep that one anyhow. I heard that you need one. I will be back. Dominic sighed. How did the news of the duel make it here before we did? Is there some special gossip spreading device in the palace? The guard laughed. You underestimate the power of gossip. Half the city knows some version of current events by now. Chapter 148. Fashionable Dominic. 15 minutes later, Dominic had a hefty bill paid and a half-dozen suitable outfits for royal events where he was not wearing sorcerer robes, at the small price of 2 months' wages. But with the reward that he had gotten from the first round of attacks, Dominic still had a fairly significant amount of wealth stored in his cube and ring. It was a strange feeling to realize that he was actually wealthy for once, but all his daily expenses were normally covered, so he rarely spent anything. Pops walked in after most of an hour and found Dominic polishing his boots in preparation for the evening's formal dinner. Good, you're ready. We have a lot of catching up to do. How did you even end up in consideration to be engaged to the princess? I'm assuming it's a matter of politics. The old dwarf asked. Dominic nodded. They're going to ask for Southern Wavemates as reparations for the war. So they need a link to the old Wavemates nobility or royalty. The cities turned on the Dago's occupation force the instant that Signia showed up with an army. They don't want that to happen to them when it's their turn to occupy the territory. Pops tapped the table as he did the mental math. That explains the options. But what they forgot to factor in was the chance that the princess would object. It's not unknown for Signia princesses to make their suitors fight for the position in the most literal sense of the word. And she's a rather accomplished paladin. Dominic smiled at the thought of Lord Jonathan facing off against Princess Alexis in single combat. That would not have ended well for him. But it might be a diplomatic incident if she took that route with the foreign candidates. Pops poured them a drink, and Dominic explained the events of the siege as they waited for the time to get ready for dinner. The maid eventually knocked at the door and entered with a huge smile on her face. Advisor Dominic, you have been summoned to a formal dinner with members of the royal family, as well as foreign guests,
she announced.
Dominic gave her his best pouting look. You're not going to just leave me hanging like that, are you? Who all was invited? The maid shook her head. We were sworn to silence. We're not allowed to say any more than that about who will be in attendance. She made a gesture with her chin, meaning the guards at the door were listening to make sure that she didn't break the rules. All right, I will be ready in 10 minutes. He just had to freshen up one last time and put on his new clothes for the event. The maid was still waiting when Dominic came back out, and she led him toward the private dining rooms that the royals used for important guests. They stopped at the door of a salon, and the royal herald began to speak. Royal advisor Dominic Wavemates, Lord Sorcerer and war veteran of Signia. That sounded suitably grand to Dominic, and he entered easily as the herald motioned him forward. Dominic entered and nodded politely at Prince Alex, then at a few minor nobles he recognized from the garden party. The salon was more of a social gathering room, but there were multiple dining rooms off this one, and once everyone had arrived, they would be separated off to join their arranged dining partners. It was a devious way to keep the suitors on edge, but Dominic wasn't going to stress about it. Worrying about things that you couldn't change only made you tired. A tall man with dark hair and black eyes noticed him the moment he entered and immediately began heading toward Dominic. Lord Wavemates, I am Thorvald North, third son of Duke North of Westcaria. It appears that I might actually have some competition to gain this marriage alliance. Dominic noticed the general's badge and the military medals on Thorvald's coat and nodded in appreciation as he shook the man's hand. At the very least, I can say that your father most likely sent the best son for the job. It's a pleasure to meet you, Lord North. A third noble came to join them, and Lord North patted his back in a friendly greeting. Sorcerer Wavemates, meet Marquis Corwin Bridgegover of Midfield. Marquis, this is the Royal Sorcerer Dominic Wavemates, advisor to Princess Alexis and fallen Prince of Wavemates, according to my research. The Marquis gave Dominic a slightly disdainful look, then glowered at Thorvald. At the very least, can't you get the order of introductions right? He demanded. The general laughed and patted him on the shoulder hard enough it tilted the other noble forward. Relax, we're all friends here. Plus, he's still a prince by birth, right? That's got to count for something, even if the nation doesn't exist anymore. Marquis Bridgegover pointedly ignored him and turned to Dominic. Well met, Lord Sorcerer. Forgive my impertinent friend. We went to school together, and he has a most unfortunate habit of forgetting proprieties. Thorvald laughed and stepped up beside the Marquis again. Corwin, you are too uptight. You know, I heard that the Lord Sorcerer was 10 years old when he first killed a man. If anyone understands my sense of humor, it's him. Dominic realized what he was doing. Casually dropping bits of information that he had gleaned about Dominic to flex his superior resource gathering and to get the other nobles talking about the carefully curated questionable history of the competitors. If he waited, Dominic was sure that Thorvald would do the same to Marquis Bridgegover in just a few minutes. But Dominic wasn't ashamed of his past. Dominic tilted his head back and laughed. You have quite the intelligence-gathering network, so it's only fair that I tell you something that they wouldn't have known. While I was 10 the first time I killed an enemy soldier, I was 14 the first time that I used a weapon to do it. The sound of shattering crystal had every head turning in their direction. A nearby young noble had dropped his wine glass, and he was staring at the trio in horror. Oh, Dickie. Come, join the conversation. Dominic, do you know Dickie? He went to school with us as well. Dickie is the younger son of Count Herthamia. Thorvald insisted. My name is Richard, second son of Count Herthamia. It's a pleasure to meet you, Lord Sorcerer. Well met, Lord Richard. Come join the party. We will all be seeing each other much more often in the near future. Dominic replied. There was no doubt the other two had definitely bullied this man wherever they had gone to school. Chapter 149. Suitors Gathered. So, one Signia noble is out of the running. We've got 2 of them here with us, so where are the others? They wouldn't be late for a formal dinner, would they? Marquis Bridgegover asked. Perhaps they reconsidered? Dominic asked. The other nobles laughed, and Thorvald shook his head. Hearing that you shot one of them wouldn't scare them away so easily. Shame really. I had hoped that this big idiot might be the one to challenge the sorcerer to a duel. Corwin frowned at Thorvald, his thick eyebrows scrunching into one line. What makes you think that I would be the one? Or are you suggesting that you wouldn't be upset if I was violently removed from the competition? Thorvald shook his head. Perish the thought, Marquis Bridgegover. Midfield needs a man of your talents. I would never wish permanent injury upon you. Public humiliation, sure, but not permanent harm. The Marquis sighed and shook his head, used to his childhood friend's antics. Curiously, Dominic noticed that nobody appeared to see through Thorvald's boisterous buffoon act. They all treated him as the crazy friend, and Thorvald was happy to go with it, but Dominic knew that wasn't his natural state. It was just an act he put on for their benefit. Dickie motioned behind them. The others are already here. They were in a side room, and just came out. The two foreign nobles turned to assess the remaining four nobles, then immediately dismissed them. Dominic wasn't as fast to dismiss them as contenders, but they were not wealthy men, and they were wearing luxury clothes a decade out of style, most likely handed down from an older brother, as they showed some signs of wear. They were putting on the proper noble airs, but the difference between them and the wealthier nobles was easy to spot. They were also avoiding coming over to greet the group that Dominic was with. A united front of sorts, with the Signia nobles separate from the foreigners and one foreign-educated local. They all went to Biverlow Academy together. It's more common with barons and merchants, but I am told that the military training is quite impressive. Dickie explained. Was Lord Jonathan part of that group? Dominic asked. The nervous noble nodded. The leader of their social group, in a way. But I don't think that will last, now that his right hand needs so much reconstruction. It might have been a mercy for him to be killed in battle. At least then his family would have gotten the death stipend from your match, not a crippled son who can no longer hold a pen or a sword. Dickie was becoming more confident as he spoke to Dominic, coming out from under the effects of years of bullying by the other two nobles present. Dominic patted him on the shoulder. I'm sure it won't be so bad. There is a man here in the castle with a Magitech hand that can do both of those things, and Lord Jonathan is only missing half of his. Rigging up a pair of fingers for gripping shouldn't be beyond the artificers. But I would assume that will be his last duel challenge. Presenting the Crown Prince, Claudius Cygnus, and the second Prince, Alex Cygnus. The crier announced. Every head in the room turned to the new arrivals, and the nobles bowed politely. Presenting the 8th and 9th princesses. The crier called. The difference in presentation annoyed Dominic. Sure, their last names would likely change with marriage, but they could at least introduce them by their given names. He had already covered this chapter in the etiquette book, and it was deemed too informal for the majority of people to greet them by their given names before they were married, so they simply weren't introduced by name during marriage negotiations. A way of helping remind young and junior nobles how to address them. Then Dominic had to stifle a laugh as he realized that the two of them were dressed identically, right down to the hair accessories and the single wisp of hair that escaped over their left temple. Marquis Bridgegover sighed and shook his head. So it's this again. Nobody can tell them apart, so they dress identically and use that as an excuse to belittle anyone who speaks to them. There isn't even a guarantee that they followed protocol and entered in order for us to try to track them. Dominic simply shrugged and walked over to greet them. Princess Josephine, it is a pleasure to see you again, and I do hope that time has been treating you well since our last encounter. Princess Alexis, a pleasure as always. Dominic greeted the pair, who curtsied slightly at the same time. He hadn't turned his head for the nobles standing behind him to know which of them he was addressing, and they weren't going to give up the games so fast. But it was clear to the others that Dominic could tell them apart. Of course he could. How many days had he spent in the command room with Alexis? How many hours were spent watching her read while he studied etiquette and Magitech engineering? Instead of introducing the others, Dominic stepped back to let them do it themselves, which earned him an annoyed glare from the Marquis and a smirk from Thorvald. Marquis Bridgegover went for the safe route and introduced himself to them both at the same time, addressing them as princesses, instead of trying to get them correct. That definitely wasn't winning him any points. But it wasn't as bad as openly pointing out that he couldn't tell the twins apart. Thorvald had a very different approach. Dominic was sure that he had been unable to tell them apart, going by his response to Dominic's introduction. But he had a solution. Looking sexy as always. He stage whispered as he stepped up beside Princess Josephine, who slapped him across the face. Princess Josephine, how I have missed our chats. Will you be joining us for dinner? Father insists I should be courting your sister, but you know that I wouldn't object to having you as a bride if you kept up that fire of yours. Perhaps introduce this future duke to the unique charms of a paladin princess." He rambled in an openly flirtatious tone. Princess Josephine glared at him, but she had that same little eye twitch as her sister did when she was amused and trying to hide it. Dominic would recognize that response anywhere. "Perhaps you could duel for my hand as well? I am to meet with Duke Saldoc of Bostoveria within the next few days for a marriage alliance negotiation. There is still time for you to get the more violent sister." Princess Josephine replied, "Don't tempt me, princess. I just might." Chapter 150, Suitor's Dinner. A bell chimed, and without a word, everyone began heading for their dining rooms. Dominic naturally fell into step beside Princess Alexis, his spot as advisor, then tried not to trip over his feet after seeing the gentle smile on her face when she placed her hand on his arm for him to escort her in. As they approached their table, a servant pulled out the princess chair for her, and Dominic smoothed her skirts as she sat, then realized his seat was assigned immediately to her left. The advisor's position, but also the seat of honor, he realized. Crown Prince Claudius was seated to her right, which would normally be the most coveted seat in the room, as it made it easiest for her to speak with him. Marquis Bridgegover was seated beside the Crown Prince, while Thorvald was seated at the foot of the table. There was one notably empty seat at the table, with the cutlery crossed on the plate and the glassware turned upside down. That would normally be the sign of an honored and recently deceased family member in Wavemates, with their place held as a memorial. But today it marked the first contestant for her hand to have been eliminated. Wine was brought, and the Crown Prince addressed the room. "Today, I will explain to you the trials that our royal father and the princess have set for the contestants. They are not many, nor are they particularly difficult. But the judging will be done entirely by the princess, who has reserved the right to refuse all suitors, or challenge the winner of the contest to a show of arms in the arena to prove themselves worthy." The nobles nodded nervously, except Dominic and Thorvald, who looked a bit too excited about the prospect. Whether that was of her rejecting everyone, or getting to fight her in the arena, Dominic wasn't sure. Thorvald was a bit of an odd one, and Dominic suspected that he was only here because he had been ordered to participate. He was still the most formidable contestant, though, not just by lineage but by attitude and talent. The first trial will be to prove your competence as a potential prince consort. So, each of you will be given an assigned task, which will be part of your royal duties in the future, should you be successful. Advisor Dominic has been excluded from roles that he already performs as her advisor, so as not to give him an unfair advantage. The Crown Prince paused, and Dicky cleared his throat. "With all due respect, Your Highness, but does the advisor not have an immeasurable advantage, no matter how we look at it?" he asked. Crown Prince Claudius turned to Dominic, nodded once at his choice of outfit, then turned back to the son of Count Herthamia. "I will admit, the advisor has some unique advantages in this case. But the trials remain the same for everyone. The first challenge is one that may be easier for some of you than others. The maids have a slip of paper with your assigned duty. You may wish to request advice on the princess preferences during dinner, or make idle conversation." A small envelope, sealed with the Crown Prince's signet, was placed in front of Dominic, who hesitated to open it until he saw that everyone else already had. He moved the paper under the table and ran a fingernail under the wax to pop it open. "Lord Sorcerer Dominic, your first task of this trial shall be a simple one, befitting a prince consort of Signia. You shall present a proper educational regimen for a daughter and a son of your family, with justification as to why this training course was chosen. Claudius. P.S. Keep your hands off my sister." Dominic smiled as he finished reading, and the Crown Prince gestured at the paper in his hands with a stern look, indicating that the note was personal, not a sentiment he had given to everyone. Most of the nobles looked pleased with the letters, and with the assumption that they had all gotten different tasks, all of them were attempting to hide their letters from the others. So, Dominic folded his and placed it in the inner pocket of his coat. The first course came out, and for a moment there was silence. Then Dominic started up a conversation to break the tension. "Now that hostilities have ceased, will you be visiting the paladins of the order? I suspect that they would appreciate the royal visit." he asked. Princess Alexis smiled gently, a genuine response to the mention of the paladins. Yes, perhaps that would be a fine way to spend the day tomorrow while you all work on your trials. I could bring my royal guard and go visit the barracks of the order. She agreed. That gave the others a small opening to join the conversation. Membership in the royal order is quite an accomplishment. Was that a personal preference during your youth, or something that you'd like to continue in the future? Marquis Bridgegover asked. Alexis shook her head. I wouldn't push any of my children to try so hard for a position within the order. It would be a great honor to have another paladin in the family, but I understand that Midfield has their own paladins. The young Marquis smiled. Indeed. Not so prestigious as Signia's royal paladins, but devoted war clerics of the battle god nonetheless. Many from the Midfield Academy go on to join them. Unfortunately, that was not my duty, as the oldest son. Alexis nodded. I believe that you went to the Signia Royal Academy here in the capital, did you not? Before you left to take over your father's estate. Indeed. Most of the gentlemen here attended either the Royal Academy or the Biverlow Academy in the south. He replied, a pointed jab at Dominic's lack of known education. Yes. Where did you study, Lord Dominic? One of the nobles from the Biverlow group asked. Dominic shrugged. I was assigned a tutor by the Wavemates family as a youth, and chose to take up the forge as an adult. I am currently an apprentice to the master of the royal forges, but I am hoping to make an attempt at journeyman, should my duties not take me in another direction.